Now lie back comfortably and take a deep breath. Tonight, I'll take you into the quiet world of merchants traveling along the Silk Road. Together, we will witness their long journeys, patient steps, and distant cities. The Silk Road was not a single path but a wide network of routes that connected distant regions across continents. Merchants who traveled along these routes did not simply move goods. They moved ideas, languages, and traditions. For many merchants, the journey began in familiar markets where the scent of spices and woven fabrics mixed with the sound of bargaining. These early markets were the places where preparations were made and where the decision to travel long distances was taken. Leaving home meant leaving behind comfort and familiarity in exchange for opportunity and discovery. Preparation for the journey required careful planning. The merchant needed to determine what goods would be most valuable in distant regions. Silk, spices, ceramics, metalwork, dyes, and medicinal herbs were among the most traded items. The merchant collected goods from local craftsmen, negotiated prices, and inspected every item to ensure its quality. Once the goods were ready, pack animals were selected, usually camels for desert routes and horses or mules for mountain paths. The choice of animals depended on the terrain and climate the merchant expected to face. Travelers rarely set out alone. To ensure safety, merchants joined caravans. A caravan offered protection through numbers and experience. It also provided shared knowledge, since some travelers knew the deserts well, while others understood mountain weather or the customs of foreign cities. Before departing, the caravan assembled outside the city, where supplies were organized, water skins were filled, ropes were checked, blankets folded, and cooking tools packed. The atmosphere was calm and steady, shaped by routine and quiet anticipation. The departure often took place early in the morning, before the heat of the day. The caravan moved slowly at first, allowing the animals to adjust to their loads. The city walls gradually faded into the distance, replaced by open land. The air felt different, lighter, quieter, and full of possibility. For new travelers, the first days could feel overwhelming. The landscape seemed endless, and the horizon always stayed ahead. But for those who had traveled the Silk Road many times, the journey felt familiar and steady. Like a slow and rhythmic motion of life itself, the merchants followed known routes, guided by experienced leaders who remembered landmarks such as distant hills, river crossings, and the locations of wells. They traveled with patience, knowing that haste could lead to exhaustion or danger. The pace of the caravan matched the rhythm of the land. Days passed quietly, and the mind adjusted to the long journey ahead. The road demanded endurance, attention, and respect. For many travelers, this slow and steady journey became a way of life, shaping how they viewed the world and their place within it. The Silk Road stretched across many lands, each with its own challenges and beauty. From the eastern cities of China to the Mediterranean shores, the routes passed through deserts, steppes, forests, and mountains. No single traveler ever crossed the entire distance, yet every merchant knew they were part of something vast. The journey connected worlds that might otherwise have remained apart. Every mile carried not only goods but also the quiet persistence of human ambition. The roads were not paved or marked. They were paths formed by generations of footsteps and hoofs. In some regions, they were wide and visible, while in others they disappeared into open plains or narrow rocky trails. In deserts, travelers followed the stars and landmarks known only to experienced guides. In the mountains, they followed streams and valleys that offered water and shelter. Every stretch of land had its own rhythm, a way of moving that suited its terrain and climate. The weather shaped much of the journey. In the deserts of Central Asia, the heat during the day could burn the skin, while the nights turned cold enough to freeze water. Travelers learned to move during the cooler hours of morning and evening. During sandstorms, the caravan stopped and waited, covering goods and faces until the wind passed. In the mountains, sudden snow or rain could block the path for days. Each delay was accepted calmly. On the Silk Road, patience was as valuable as courage. The landscape also influenced the pace of trade. In open grasslands, the caravan could move swiftly, covering great distances in a week. In rocky areas or dense forests, progress slowed to a crawl. Yet the merchants rarely complained. They had learned that travel was not only about reaching a destination but also about surviving the path itself. The slow rhythm of movement allowed them to observe, think, and remember. The road became their teacher. Villages and small settlements dotted the route, each providing water, food, and brief rest. Local people greeted the caravans, offering supplies or trading local goods for foreign items. These encounters brought small but meaningful exchanges: a jar of honey for a bolt of silk, or a leather flask traded for a handful of spices. Such moments reminded travelers that the Silk Road was not only a commercial network but also a chain of human connections stretching across continents. At sunset, the caravan often stopped near a water source or a sheltered hill. Fires were lit, and meals were prepared with care. The merchants shared simple food: dried meat, flatbread, dates, and tea brewed from local herbs. As the stars appeared, the conversations quieted. The desert air cooled, and the sounds of camels resting filled the night. The stillness of the land made every sound gentle, every thought slower. In those hours, far from any city, travelers felt the deep peace that came with movement, the steady comfort of knowing the road continued beyond the horizon. Life along the Silk Road moved according to a steady routine that rarely changed, no matter how far the travelers journeyed. Each day began before sunrise, when the air was still cool and the desert had not yet awakened to its daytime heat. The merchants rose quietly, often with little conversation, because speaking early in the morning felt unnecessary when the tasks were already familiar. The camels were lifted to their feet with gentle tugs of rope, their long legs unfolding slowly, and the cargo was inspected carefully to ensure nothing had shifted or loosened overnight. Silk needed to stay dry and protected. Spices had to be sealed so that their scents did not attract animals. Glass items had to be checked for cracks after the previous day's travel. Everything had its place, and every traveler knew exactly what to do. Breakfast was simple and eaten quickly: flatbread warmed over a small flame, dried fruits, olives if available, and water that was carried inside leather skins. There was no luxury along the road, and no one expected any. Energy was saved for the journey ahead, because every hour of walking required focus and patience. Once prepared, the caravan began to move as the first light appeared along the horizon. They traveled in a long, organized line, with guards placed at the front and rear. The merchants positioned themselves near their own goods, both for responsibility and comfort. In the beginning of the day, the pace was steady and calm, the footsteps soft, and the world around them quiet. Travel continued for hours before a break. Conversation was limited during this part of the journey. It was considered wasteful to use energy on words when the heat and distance already demanded enough from the body. Instead, travelers thought silently, reflecting on home, family, or simply the long road ahead. The desert was not an empty place; it had its own quiet sounds. The wind shifted the sand. Small birds crossed the sky in quick movements. Every now and then, the caravan might pass another group traveling in the opposite direction, and these moments felt almost ceremonial. Each group nodded respectfully, acknowledging the difficulty and discipline of the journey. By midday, when the sun reached its highest point, the heat became too strong to continue. The caravan stopped and formed shelter using cloth canopies tied between camels, creating shaded spaces on the ground. During these hours of rest, travelers sat in circles. repaired equipment, checked maps, cleaned harnesses, or simply closed their eyes. Sometimes, those who were skilled in storytelling would speak about places they had visited on previous journeys, cities with high walls, markets filled with colors and voices. Rulers who collected rare objects from faraway lands. These stories were told slowly and calmly, not to excite or entertain, but to pass time gently until the heat faded. In the afternoon, the caravan continued traveling until the sun began to fall again. Evening was the most welcome part of the day. The sky turned softer, the air cooled, and the shadows grew long. Once camp was made, fires were lit carefully, always kept small to avoid attracting unwanted attention. Meals in the evening were simple like the morning, yet they felt more comforting after long hours of travel. Some nights, musicians traveling with the caravan played quiet melodies on flutes or small stringed instruments, soft enough not to travel beyond the camp. Guard rotations were assigned, and while most slept, a few stayed awake, keeping watch over the quiet, shifting desert. This was daily life for merchants on the Silk Road, steady, rhythmic, patient. There was no hurry, no sudden change, no unnecessary noise. The road was long, and the only way to travel it was to match its pace. Those who tried to rush did not last. Those who respected the rhythm of the journey were the ones who reached the next city, the next trade post, the next opportunity. The routine was not simply a schedule, it was survival. Along the Silk Road, there were places built specifically for travelers to rest, called caravanserai. These were fortified inns, usually positioned a day's journey apart, so that merchants and their caravans could stop safely for the night. The harsh landscapes and long distances made these shelters essential, not only for physical rest but also for security and trade. A caravanserai could be found in deserts, valleys, plains, and near mountain passes, and each was designed to provide a moment of calm in a journey that demanded endurance and patience. Approaching a caravanserai after many days on the road brought a sense of relief. From a distance, it often appeared as a stone or mud brick structure with high walls and a heavy gate. Guards watched from towers, scanning the horizon for travelers or possible threats. As the caravan came closer, the dust of the desert began to settle, the pace slowed, and the noise of footsteps and camel bells echoed softly against the walls. Entering through the gate felt like stepping briefly into another world, a world of stillness and shelter. Inside the courtyard, there was space for the camels to be tied and unloaded. The air was quieter here, shielded from the winds outside. Travelers attended to their animals first, giving them water, brushing the dust from their fur, and allowing them to rest. Only when the animals were settled did the merchants turn to their own needs. Water was brought from wells within the caravanserai, and travelers washed their hands, faces, and clothing. Meals were simple but comforting: fresh bread baked on site, lentil soups, dried fruits, and occasionally warm tea or spiced broth. Each caravanserai also served as a place of exchange. Merchants met travelers from distant lands, sometimes traveling in opposite directions along the Silk Road. They traded news before goods. Conversations shared information about road conditions, outbreaks of conflict, weather patterns, or changes in city markets. This information was as valuable as any physical goods, because it shaped decisions about where to travel next and what to buy or sell. In this way, caravanserai acted like crossroads not only of trade, but of knowledge. The architecture of caravanserai was designed to ensure safety. Thick walls and strong gates protected against bandits. Rooms were arranged around the courtyard, allowing travelers to sleep near their animals and belongings. At night, the gates were closed and guarded, and a quiet calm filled the space. Lanterns flickered in the corridors, and the sound of evening prayers or soft conversation echoed gently through the stone passages. Even though many travelers came and went, Each night carried a shared sense of temporary community. For the merchants, sleeping in a real bed, even a simple one, felt luxurious after days on the open road. They slept deeply, knowing the walls would protect them. When morning came, preparations began once again. Loads were checked, ropes tightened, and maps studied under the soft early light. Some travelers stayed longer to recover from illness or injury, while others continued onward as soon as they were able. Caravanserai did not remove the difficulty of the journey, but they offered a moment of peace, a reminder that travel was not only hardship, but also connection. These rest stops were small islands of safety scattered across vast distances, and for those who walked the Silk Road, they were the difference between exhaustion and endurance. Traveling across the vast deserts of the Silk Road was one of the greatest challenges merchants faced. The desert was not simply empty land, it was a shifting, living environment where heat, wind, sand, and silence shaped the pace of every journey. The landscape stretched so wide that the horizon seemed endless, and travelers often moved for days without seeing anything except dunes, sky, and their own caravan's tracks slowly fading behind them. To cross such terrain required discipline, experience, and a deep respect for nature's power. The greatest threat was the heat. During the daytime, sunlight poured down with an intensity that could weaken even the strongest traveler. The sand beneath their feet burned, and the air shimmered as though it were made of fire. For this reason, merchants planned their travel carefully, often resting during the brightest hours and walking during the cooler parts of the morning and late afternoon. Water was the most precious resource. Carried in carefully sealed skins and rationed with strict control, every person in the caravan understood that a single careless choice could put everyone at risk. The wind was another challenge. Desert winds could rise suddenly, lifting sand into great waves that rolled through the air. These sandstorms could erase the paths the caravan followed and make it impossible to see even a few steps ahead. When this happened, the travelers stopped immediately, huddling close to their camels and covering their faces with cloth to protect their eyes and lungs. There was no use in fighting the wind. They waited for it to pass, sometimes for minutes, sometimes for hours. Silence returned only slowly afterward, like a soft blanket settling over the desert again. Despite the dangers, the merchants were not entirely alone. Guides who specialized in desert travel were essential members of the caravan. These guides had learned to read signs in the landscape that others could not see, patterns in the sand, the movement of distant birds, even the smell of the air. They knew where hidden wells could be found, as small sources of water buried beneath rocks or in dry riverbeds. Without these guides, many caravans would have lost their way or perished in the desert's vast emptiness. Night in the desert was strikingly different. The heat vanished, replaced by a deep, quiet cold. The sky unfolded above with countless stars, brighter than in any city or village. The travelers built small fires, not for light but for warmth, and gathered close together to share the silence of the night. The desert at night felt endless, but also strangely peaceful. It reminded travelers that they were only passing through. Small figures against an ancient world. Animals presented risks as well. The desert was home to snakes, scorpions, and wild dogs that sometimes followed caravans, waiting for weakness or leftovers. Guards slept lightly, and the camp perimeter was always watched. Even the camels could sense danger, sometimes waking before any human heard or saw anything. The relationship between travelers and their animals was built on awareness and quiet trust. Crossing the desert required patience more than strength. It was not a place to conquer but a place to endure. Those who respected its rhythm survived the journey and continued toward cities where trade, shelter, and community waited. Those who underestimated it learned quickly or not at all. The desert taught caution, discipline, and humility. For merchants of the Silk Road, it was a passage they had to accept, step by steady step. After leaving the great deserts behind, the merchants eventually reached the mountain ranges that formed another barrier along the Silk Road. These mountains were vast and ancient, their peaks often hidden beneath clouds or snow. The journey through them required a different kind of endurance. Instead of heat, there was cold. Instead of open space, there were narrow paths that wound along cliffs and deep valleys. The travelers understood that these mountains were just as powerful and unforgiving as the deserts they had crossed. The air grew thin as the caravan climbed higher. Breathing became slower, and every step required more effort. The camels, sturdy and patient, moved carefully along the rocky trails. They knew how to place their feet, steady and deliberate. The travelers walked beside them in quiet concentration, speaking only when necessary. Sound traveled in strange ways in the mountains. Sometimes even a whisper seemed to echo endlessly across stone. The weather changed without warning. Soft sunlight could turn into freezing wind within an hour. Clouds gathered around the peaks like heavy curtains, and sometimes snow began to fall even in seasons when the plains below were warm. The merchants wore thick cloaks, wrapping their hands and faces to protect themselves. Fires were difficult to make at high altitude, so they relied on movement and shared body warmth to stay comfortable during the night. Mountain guides were essential. Just like desert guides, these guides knew which passes were safe and which slopes were too unstable to cross. They recognized signs of avalanches, could predict storms by the color of the sky, and understood how to measure the strength of ice on frozen streams. The merchants trusted them completely. A single wrong turn in the mountains could lead to disaster, and everyone in the caravan knew it. At night, the mountains grew unbelievably quiet. The stars appeared close enough to touch, shining like silver dust scattered across the dark sky. The travelers sat beside their camels, sipping warm tea when possible, listening to the faint sound of wind weaving through the rocks. The stillness brought a deep, reflective calm. Many merchants found themselves thinking about home, their families, the reason they were on this road. The mountains had a way of making a person feel small but also connected to something old and immense. Despite the difficulties, there were moments of beauty and wonder. Mountain flowers, small and bright, sometimes grew between stones. Clear streams ran down from the peaks, providing fresh, cold water. Snow glowed pale blue under moonlight. These were small, quiet gifts of the journey. Reminders that hardship could still contain gentleness. Crossing the mountains tested patience and spirit. It was a slow journey, measured step by step, day by day. But once the travelers descended into the valleys on the other side, they knew they were moving closer to the cities of Central Asia, places of rest, trade, stories, and warmth. Every time a merchant crossed such mountains, they carried the memory of the experience like a silent mark on the heart, a reminder of resilience, endurance, and the long road that connected peoples and worlds. When the merchants finally descended from the mountains and approached the plains again, they often found shelter in large stone inns known as caravanserai. These structures were built along the Silk Road at intervals long enough to match the pace of a traveling caravan. A caravanserai was not simply a place to sleep. It was a refuge, a meeting point, and a hub of quiet activity. For travelers who had spent weeks in open terrain, the sight of solid walls and a large wooden gate brought a deep sense of relief. Most caravanserai followed a similar design. Massive exterior walls formed a protective barrier against thieves, wild animals, and harsh weather. Inside was a large open courtyard where camels could be tied and unloaded. Surrounding the courtyard were rooms and storage spaces. Some were simple and bare, others more elaborate depending on the region and the wealth of the patrons who built them. But all shared the same purpose: to offer rest, safety, and a pause in the long journey. Upon arrival, the first task was always to tend to the animals. The camels were fed, watered, brushed, and allowed to rest their tired legs. Their quiet grumbling filled the courtyard, a familiar sound to any traveler of the road. Only after the animals were settled did the merchants attend to themselves. They washed their hands and faces, sometimes bathed if water was plentiful, and then sat down to eat. The meals at caravanserai were simple but comforting: bread, rice, dried fruits, and warm stew made from lentils or vegetables were common. The warmth of the food restored strength, but just as important was the sense of being in a place where one did not need to keep watch every moment. Merchants from different lands gathered at long tables, speaking in low voices, exchanging stories of the road, describing market conditions, or simply enjoying the quiet presence of others. At night, lanterns flickered in the corridors, casting soft golden light against stone walls. Some travelers slept early, wrapped in blankets, their breathing slow and deep. Others remained awake, sitting in the courtyard beneath the stars, reflecting on the journey behind them and the long miles ahead. The caravanserai felt suspended in time, a peaceful space between departure and destination. Many friendships were formed in these places, as well as agreements and trade partnerships. A merchant might learn of new routes, new dangers, or new opportunities. The Silk Road was not just a passage for goods, it was a passage for knowledge. Information moved along it like wind across the plains, carried from traveler to traveler. Yet there was also silence. The thick stone walls blocked the noise of the outside world. Travelers could breathe, think, and feel their fatigues away in the gentle hush of the night, with camels resting and fires glowing softly. The caravanserai became a sanctuary where the long road felt kinder. When morning came, the routine began again. The merchants packed their belongings, secured their cargo, checked the weather, and thanked their hosts. The gates opened, and the caravan stepped back onto the road. The rest was temporary, but the memory of the stillness lingered, giving strength for the miles ahead. Trade along the Silk Road was rarely a quick exchange. It was a process shaped by patience, understanding, and careful evaluation. When merchants arrived in a new city or market, they did not immediately begin selling their goods. First, they observed. They studied the atmosphere of the marketplace, the prices being offered, the availability of certain items, and the attitudes of the local buyers and sellers. Knowing when to speak and when to wait was considered a valuable skill. Markets along the Silk Road were places of constant movement. Stalls lined the streets, filled with textiles, spices, metals, pottery, and countless other goods. The air carried rich scents, the aroma of dried herbs, fragrant resins, warm bread, and burning incense. Voices blended together into a low, continuous hum, as negotiation was the foundation of trade. Buying and selling were never fixed interactions, they were conversations. A merchant's reputation was one of their greatest assets. Trust meant more than any contract. If a merchant was known to cheat, lie, or alter the quality of goods, word would travel quickly throughout the trading network. A single dishonest deal could close the doors of many future opportunities. Therefore, most traders valued honesty, or at least the appearance of fairness. The Silk Road depended on relationships as much as it depended on the goods themselves. Negotiation followed certain patterns. The buyer would ask a price, often lower than what he expected to pay. The seller would ask for more than he expected to receive. The conversation moved slowly, with pauses, consideration, respectful gestures, and careful phrasing. Neither side raised their voice. Trade was not a battle. It was a shared recognition that both parties sought benefit. Translation and interpretation were also essential. Along the Silk Road, languages shifted frequently. Persian, Arabic, Chinese, Turkish, Sogdian, Mongolian, and many other languages mixed together in the markets. Interpreters worked as bridges, ensuring understanding and preventing conflict. These interpreters were often former merchants themselves, familiar with both vocabulary and the subtle customs of negotiation. Sometimes agreements were formalized with handshakes, shared meals, or written contracts sealed with wax. Other times, trust alone was enough. A merchant might purchase goods on credit, promising to pay upon reaching another city. In many cases, this faith was honored. The road taught merchants that cooperation increased survival. Trade also exchanged ideas. A merchant who came to buy silk might leave with knowledge of new crops, new styles of architecture, or new religious beliefs. The Silk Road did not only move objects, it connected ways of thinking. Through trade, distant cultures influenced one another slowly, quietly, and permanently. By the end of the day, merchants often felt tired but satisfied. They returned to their lodgings, recorded prices and transactions in small notebooks, and prepared their goods for the next stage of the journey. The negotiations of the marketplace were part of the rhythm of the road, steady, patient, and shaped by centuries of shared human experience. As merchants continued along the Silk Road, they encountered cultures that were different from their own in language, customs, clothing, and beliefs. Yet, the road connected these differences rather than dividing them. The merchants who traveled long distances understood that respect was the first and most essential rule. A traveler who showed humility and curiosity was welcomed in many places, even among strangers. Hospitality was a shared tradition across much of the Silk Road. In regions from Central Asia to the Middle East, from Persia to Anatolia, welcoming a traveler was considered a duty of honor. A guest was not simply a visitor, they were a temporary part of the household or community. Often, merchants were offered tea, bread, or warm soup before any questions were asked. The act of sharing food formed the first bond. These gatherings were calm and thoughtful. Inside tents made of wool or homes built of stone or mud brick, merchants sat together on carpets or cushions. Conversation flowed slowly, with pauses for reflection. Instead of rushing, people took time to listen. The stories shared often involved travels across distant lands, encounters with unfamiliar landscapes, and lessons learned on the road. The exchange of gifts was also a common way of showing goodwill. A merchant might present a small box of tea leaves, a length of silk ribbon, or a piece of carved wood. These gifts did not need to be expensive. Their meaning came from the gesture itself. In return, the hosts might offer dried fruit, herbs, or a small crafted item. Through this mutual offering, relationships began to take form. Songs and poetry were shared as well. In some regions, hosts would recite verses passed down from their ancestors, while others played simple instruments that filled the night air with soft rhythms. These cultural expressions were not performances, but invitations to feel the history, memory, and identity of the community. Even in places where languages differed entirely, a sense of connection remained possible through gestures, smiles, and shared meals. The Silk Road taught travelers that understanding did not always require words. Presence itself carried meaning. Of course, misunderstandings sometimes happened. Customs varied widely, and not every situation was simple. But most travelers approached differences with patience, and most hosts offered guidance with kindness. The road encouraged a spirit of adaptation. Over time, merchants began to carry the customs of many lands within themselves. A traveler might learn how to greet someone in several languages, how to drink tea in different styles, or how to show respect in unfamiliar rituals. These layers of experience transformed them By the time they returned home, they were no longer only from one place. They had become a bridge between worlds. In this way, the Silk Road created a quiet unity among distant cultures, not by force, but through shared journeys, open doors, and the simple humanity of offering a traveler a place to rest. Travel along the Silk Road was not only a journey of trade and cultural exchange, but also a test of endurance and caution. The landscapes were vast and unpredictable. In deserts, the wind could erase the path within moments, leaving only a horizon of sand with no sign of direction. In mountain passes, sudden storms could sweep through, turning the path into ice or mud. Travelers needed to read the land carefully, watching the sun, the stars, and even the shapes of distant hills to stay on course. Bandits were another danger. Isolated stretches of the road offered opportunities for ambush. These were not always large groups. Sometimes just a few individuals could create fear and uncertainty. To protect themselves, merchants traveled in caravans, usually led by experienced guides who knew the safe resting places, the distances between wells, and the tribes who controlled different regions. A strong caravan was not defined only by numbers, but by unity and trust. Caravans developed silent systems of alertness. One traveler kept watch, while others rested. Horses, camels, and donkeys were tied in ways that allowed them to react quickly if danger approached. Fires at night were kept small so they would not reveal the location from too far away. These habits became part of the rhythm of life on the road. Natural illnesses were also a constant concern. Harsh winds, unfamiliar food, contaminated water, and exhaustion could weaken even the strongest merchant. Many travelers carried small herbs or powders learned from healers along the route: a dried mint for the stomach, salt for the body in the desert heat, and cloth soaked in vinegar to cleanse wounds. Knowledge of how to care for one's body was as important as knowledge of trade. There were times when travelers had to simply wait. If a storm blocked a mountain pass, if the heat in the desert grew too intense, or if tension rose in a region due to conflict, caravans would stop at caravanserai or safe camps until the path was clear. Patience was a survival skill. Rushing meant danger. Despite these risks, the journeys continued year after year. The Silk Road was sustained not just by goods, but by human determination. The merchants knew that challenge was part of the journey. Safety came not from avoiding danger entirely, but from learning to move wisely, with awareness and respect for the world around them. Along the vast stretches of the Silk Road, caravanserai played an essential role in the safety and comfort of travelers. These structures were built at intervals that matched the typical distance a caravan could travel in a day. Some were located near wells in the desert, others at the entrances of mountain passes, and many more near trading towns. They served as waypoints, offering rest, water, and protection within sturdy walls. Without caravanserai, long-distance travel would have been far more dangerous and exhausting. A typical caravanserai was designed with high stone walls and a single strong gate. This prevented thieves or wild animals from entering during the night. Inside, there was a large open courtyard where camels, horses, and donkeys could be tied and fed. Surrounding the courtyard were simple rooms where merchants could sleep on carpets or mats. These rooms were modest, but they offered shelter from wind, heat, or cold. For travelers who had spent days exposed to the elements, even a simple roof and shaded walls felt like luxury. Some caravanserai included stables, workshops, storage rooms, and small prayer spaces. Others offered food for purchase, cooked by resident staff who lived there permanently. In larger caravanserai near major trade centers, one could hear languages from many regions: Persian, Chinese, Arabic, Turkic, Greek, and sometimes even Latin. It was in these places that news and rumors of distant kingdoms were shared. They are buzzed with a quiet sense of connection. The arrival of a caravan was often calm and methodical. Animals were led to drink water first. Merchants inspected their goods for damage. Everyone checked their clothing, equipment, and supplies. The evening routine brought a sense of peace. The sun set slowly, casting long shadows across the stone walls. And conversations softened as travelers settled to rest. Night in the caravanserai was safe, but still not entirely silent. The movements of animals, the murmurs of people, and the distant sound of wind blended into a steady, gentle atmosphere. Many travelers fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the road. Others stayed awake for a while, staring at the stars framed by the courtyard above, thinking of home or the journey ahead. Caravanserai were more than resting places. They were hubs of culture. Ideas traveled just as easily as silk or porcelain. A single conversation shared by the fire could influence trade decisions, diplomatic relations, or personal beliefs. Travelers left caravanserai not only rested but often changed in small ways, carrying new thoughts with them. For centuries, caravanserai continued to support merchants and pilgrims, even as political powers shifted and roads changed. Some of these stone shelters remain standing. Today, many are ruins, but their walls still suggest the quiet presence of the countless journeys that once passed through. Now lie back comfortably and take a deep breath. Tonight, I'll take you into the quiet world of merchants traveling along the Silk Road. Together, we will witness their long journeys, patient steps, and distant cities. Around the courtyard were rooms for merchants, storage areas for goods, and sometimes a small prayer space or guest hall. The design of caravanserai was practical and consistent across many regions, allowing travelers to quickly understand where to place their belongings and how the space functioned. The daily routine within a caravanserai followed a steady rhythm. After arrival, the first priority was to tend to the animals. Their saddles and packs were removed, and they were given water and feed. Only after ensuring the well-being of the animals did the merchants begin to rest themselves. Meals were simple and based on the supplies each traveler carried. Bread, dried fruits, nuts, and occasionally warm stew prepared by a caretaker formed the basis of the evening meal. A small fire provided light and warmth, but noise remained low, as most travelers valued rest over conversation. Despite its simplicity, the caravanserai was a place where many cultures met. Merchants from different regions often shared brief conversations about the roads ahead, market conditions, or local customs. These exchanges were calm and respectful. The travelers understood that the road demanded cooperation, not competition. Maps were compared, weather was discussed, and news from distant cities quietly passed from one group to another. No one stayed long enough to form deep relationships. Yet these short encounters created a network of shared knowledge that extended across continents. The nights were usually quiet. The heavy walls blocked desert winds and softened the sounds of the outside world. In the courtyard, the breathing of animals formed a steady background rhythm. Some travelers slept in private rooms, while others preferred the open spaces near their goods. Lamps burned softly, their light dim and steady. The calm atmosphere of the caravanserai allowed travelers to regain strength and prepare for the next stage of the journey. Caravanserai stood as points of stability in a world defined by movement. They reminded travelers that even on long and uncertain roads, there were places of shelter and rest. Each stay was temporary, yet essential. The road continued, but the memory of safety and stillness would accompany them long after they departed. The Silk Road was not only a route for goods, it was also a route for ideas, beliefs, languages, and traditions. Merchants traveling across vast distances encountered new cultures at every major stop, and these interactions shaped the world in quiet but lasting ways. A traveler who left his home speaking only his native tongue often returned able to understand fragments of several languages, because trade required communication and patience. Words blended gradually, and expressions from one region found their way into another. Over time, the Silk Road became a living bridge that connected societies that had never met face to face. Religions traveled along the same routes as silk and spices. Buddhist monks journeyed westward, carrying scriptures and teachings. Islamic scholars and merchants traveled eastward, sharing knowledge of mathematics, astronomy, and law. Zoroastrian fire temples, Christian churches of the East, and Buddhist monasteries stood within distance of one another in some trade cities, rather than conflict. Travelers often approached these differences with quiet curiosity. They observed rituals, asked simple questions, and listened. The long journey encouraged patience, and patience fostered understanding. Art also moved along the Silk Road. Textiles woven in one region inspired the patterns of another. Pottery styles blended forms and techniques acquired through generations of exchange. Metalwork, jewelry, and clothing designs reflected mixed influences that slowly formed new visual identities. Even music traveled with the caravans. A melody played on a stringed instrument in Central Asia sometimes reminded a traveler of a tune heard far to the west. No one recorded the exact moment when these influences crossed, because the exchange happened naturally, day by day, market by market. Food changed as well. Merchants often carried dried fruits, nuts, and grains, but they also tasted meals prepared by local cooks wherever they traveled. Spices gained new value when introduced to distant kitchens. A taste discovered in one caravanserai could become a favorite ingredient in another city far away. Over time, entire cuisines transformed, shaped not by official decisions but by simple everyday choices made by travelers and hosts. Even clothing adapted to the needs of the road. A merchant from a colder region might begin wearing light and loose desert garments after weeks under the sun. A traveler accustomed to warm climates might adopt layered clothing when crossing mountains. These adjustments were practical, but they also reflected mutual respect for the knowledge of local people. The cultural exchange of the Silk Road did not happen suddenly. It was not the result of a single event or decision. It was the gradual accumulation of countless small interactions, conversations shared over meals, gestures used to explain unfamiliar concepts, stories told while waiting for water to boil or animals to rest. The influence of these exchanges continued even when the journeys ended. A merchant returned home not only with goods but with memories, habits, and insights gained along the way. In this silent manner, the Silk Road helped shape the shared heritage of many civilizations. Travel along the Silk Road often required crossing the vast Central Asian steppes, a landscape characterized by wide open grasslands, distant horizons, and strong seasonal winds. The steppe could appear peaceful at first glance, with its quiet stretches and gentle slopes, but it demanded respect from those who traveled across it. The climate changed rapidly. Even within the same day, the weather could shift from warm sunlight to cold wind. Travelers learned to adapt to these changes without complaint, moving steadily and without haste. Caravans typically traveled early in the morning and late in the afternoon, avoiding the strongest heat at midday in summer and the coldest winds in winter. The open terrain made navigation easier than in the desert, but it also meant there was little shelter. Trees were rare, and natural landmarks were few. Guides who knew the land well were essential. They recognized subtle changes in the shape of hills and the direction of streams, signs that others might easily overlook. Nomadic peoples lived throughout the steppe, moving their herds according to the season. These groups were skilled riders and were accustomed to long distances. Sometimes, merchants and nomads exchanged goods directly in temporary roadside encampments. The interactions were calm and practical. Nomads offered milk, wool, or horses, while merchants provided tools, cloth, or grain. These exchanges helped both groups survive and strengthen peaceful relations along the route. Wine was a constant presence on the steppe. It shaped the soundscape of travel, carrying distant noises and smoothing others away. The sound of hooves, wheels, and footsteps seemed softer under the wide sky. At night, the steppe grew quiet. Travelers often camped near rivers or low hills, using the terrain to block the wind. Fires were kept small to conserve fuel. Meals were simple and warm, and conversation was gentle, if it occurred at all. Life on the steppe reminded travelers of the vast scale of their journey. Distances were long, and progress was measured slowly. Yet there was also a quiet sense of continuity. The same grasses had waved under the wind for generations. The same paths had been walked by countless caravans before. The steppe required patience, but it also offered a sense of calm. Under the open sky, travelers found time to think, reflect, and understand their place within the larger world. When caravans reached large trade cities along the Silk Road, the atmosphere changed noticeably. The calm rhythm of open travel gave way to the quiet organization of market life. Cities such as Samarkand, Bukhara, Kashgar, Ray, and Merv acted as central points where merchants gathered, exchanged goods, and prepared for the next stage of their journeys. These cities were built not only for habitation but also for commerce. Streets were arranged to guide travelers toward market districts, caravanserai, storage warehouses, and public wells. The layout reflected the needs of people who moved goods regularly and efficiently. The marketplace was the heart of the city. It was usually located near the central crossroads, where roads from different regions met. Merchants set up stalls or opened small shop rooms, connected to narrow streets. Goods were displayed carefully to show their quality. Rolls of silk caught the light. Ceramics reflected soft colors. Metal tools, spices, leather, wool, and carved wooden objects were kept in organized groups. The market was not loud. Negotiation was measured and respectful. As merchants valued clarity more than excitement, social structure played an important role in these trade spaces. Guilds, associations of craftsmen and traders, helped maintain fairness and consistency. A cloth merchant would often belong to a cloth guild, a potter to a potter's guild, and so on. These groups trained apprentices, protected standards, and settled disputes quietly. Their presence helped ensure that the market remained stable, even when travelers came from faraway regions with unfamiliar customs. Local officials also observed market activities. Their task was not to interfere in trade but to ensure that basic regulations were followed, weights and measures were checked. Prices were compared so that manipulation remained minimal. A fair market encouraged repeat travel. And repeat travel strengthened the city's role on the Silk Road. People from different backgrounds met naturally in these spaces. A merchant from Persia might speak to a trader from China through a translator familiar with both languages. A traveler from Arabia might purchase goods brought by a caravan that originated in India. No one needed to fully share the same language or culture. Trade itself provided a common structure for cooperation. Hand gestures, simple phrases, and calm expression created understanding when words did not. The market also influenced daily life outside commerce. Inns, bathhouses, gardens, and small tea houses developed around these economic centers. Merchants rested, washed, prayed, and reflected. Time in the city allowed travelers to regain physical and mental clarity before continuing their journeys. Some remained for months or longer, waiting for the right season or caravan to depart. Others stayed just long enough to trade, repair gear, and rest. The city market represented the meeting point between movement and settlement. Caravans brought goods and stories. The city provided structure and continuity. The exchange between the two shaped not only the Silk Road economy but also the cultural identity of the regions it connected. In this slow and steady way, cities became anchors in a world defined by travel. As merchants began to complete their business in the trade city, a gradual shift occurred in their daily routines. The busy days spent negotiating, weighing goods, examining fabrics, and organizing storage slowly gave way to tasks focused on preparing for the return journey. There was no rush. Travel on the Silk Road required patience, and merchants preferred to depart only when conditions were favorable and their caravans were fully ready. The first step of preparation was assessing the animals. Camels needed rest, veterinary care, and sometimes replacement. Stable keepers and handlers examined the animals carefully. They checked hooves, fur, and breathing patterns. If a camel showed signs of fatigue or illness, it was either treated or exchanged with another animal from a local handler. Animals were essential companions on the journey. Their condition affected not only speed but also safety. Merchants also inspected their personal equipment. Saddles needed stitching. Ropes needed tightening. Water carriers were tested for leaks. Small repairs were done quietly in courtyard workshops inside the caravanserai. The environment was calm. The only sounds were soft hammering, stitching, and the occasional murmur of conversation. The goal was not to hurry but to make sure everything was strong enough for the long road ahead. During this time, merchants also reviewed their finances. They counted coins carefully, divided them into small bags for convenience, and recorded transactions in simple ledgers. Some merchants exchanged their earnings for lighter materials that were easier to transport. Others entrusted part of their wealth to local money handlers, intending to retrieve it during a future visit. Trade was not just about movement, it was also about maintaining connections. Evenings during this preparation period were particularly reflective. The city, lit by oil lamps, moved at a slower pace after sunset. Merchants sat in quiet tea houses, sharing calm conversation. They rarely discussed profits. Instead, they spoke about the weather conditions along the road, news from distant regions, or experiences from past journeys. These stories were told without dramatic expression. They were shared simply to provide guidance and understanding. As the days passed, the caravans reached a point where everything necessary had been gathered and restored. The animals were strong. Supplies were organized. The merchants had paid their respects in the local prayer house and had taken their final baths. There was a sense of readiness, but also a quiet awareness that the road ahead would be long and steady, just like the one before. Departure did not happen suddenly. It often began early in the morning, while the city was still cool. The caravan leader called out short instructions. Camels rose slowly, one after another, creating a soft rustling sound. Merchants took their positions, adjusted their clothing, and checked the ropes securing the cargo. There was no farewell ceremony. The caravan simply moved forward, easing out of the city and returning once again to the open road. The journey did not feel like an ending. Instead, it felt like part of a continuous cycle. Trade on the Silk Road had no final destination. Every arrival led to another departure. Every return was only temporary. The merchants understood this and accepted it calmly. The road shaped their lives as much as their work did. In time, the lives of the merchants blended with the road itself. The Silk Road was not only a route of trade, but also a path of understanding between many cultures. Every city visited, every caravan met, and every conversation shared at night by the fire became part of a quiet exchange of knowledge. The journey shaped the merchants as much as their labor shaped the world around them. The road continued long after each traveler returned home, and its stories continued to travel even further than the caravans themselves. The passing of years did not fade the importance of the Silk Road. Goods continued to move across deserts, mountains, rivers, and plains. Languages mixed, beliefs encountered one another, and customs evolved through gentle contact. The merchants did not see themselves as creators of history. They simply worked, traded, traveled, and adapted, yet, through their steady movement, they connected distant worlds and made it possible for ideas to travel farther than any single person could. In the quiet memory of history, the merchants of the Silk Road are remembered not for battles or conquests, but for patience, endurance, and cooperation. Their lives were shaped by long horizons, slow journeys, and shared survival. The Silk Road stands as a reminder that the world has always been connected, not only through wealth and trade, but through the steady footsteps of ordinary people who carried with them stories, languages, hopes, and the quiet desire to continue forward.